With this presentation, I will discuss quality aspects which should be considered during development of pediatric medicines and reflected in PIP applications. This presentation is a starting point in a discussion about aspects relating to development of medicines for children. But it's a starting point, as there are still aspects which require further elaboration and further dialogue with all interested parties. We need to recognize that there are still some questions which haven't been answered, and we as regulators are actively looking for answers to those questions, and I'm sure that also stakeholders, industry, academia are also interested to find those answers. We need to recognize gaps in the knowledge and work towards finding relevant answers. This presentation will provide an overview of existing guidelines and current thoughts of development of pediatric medicines. I will also highlight gaps and limitations in current knowledge and understanding around the age appropriateness of pediatric medicines. But let's start with the legal framework to set up the scene. The story began with pediatric regulation, Regulation 1901-2006, which came into force in January 2007. Objective of the regulation was to improve the health of children by assuring ethical research into medicines for children, increasing availability of authorized medicines for children, and improving information on medicines. All this should be achieved without unnecessary studies in children and without delaying authorization of medicines for adults. So we can say that the goal of legislators is simple and well understood: to assure availability of better medicines for children. However, implementation of the regulation is or was not so simple. This new piece of legislation significantly changed the approach to products development. New paradigm became mandatory. Development of pediatric medicines should commence with development of medicines for adults. In the past, very often pediatric development was considered only after obtaining authorization for adults and resulted in delays in access to medicines for this age group. With the new paradigm, medicines for children are being developed in parallel to medicines for adults. To help and assure high quality and ethical research, companies are obliged to discuss and agree their development strategy with regulators. This should be done prior to starting any studies to assure that development plan is appropriate and protects children. This strategy should be presented as Pediatric Investigation Plan. PIP defines studies, measures, and timelines necessary to ensure that medicine can obtain pediatric indication, and from quality perspective, the PIP defines the age-appropriate design forms, formulations, and all aspects related to administration of the medicine. It is expected that implementation of the pediatric regulation will increase the number of specific age-appropriate formulations for children. The industry is expected to develop relevant and acceptable formulations with convenient and precise dosing characteristics on an industrial scale which are suitable for marketing. We can see that the goal is simple and the intentions are good. But what about the execution? Preparation of a good PIP application requires some homework to be done. It's a complex subject that only systematic approach will lead to a success. Let's discuss, and this is an invitation to a dialogue, how to develop good pediatric medicines, what is acceptable and what should be avoided, what does age-appropriate and acceptable formulation mean. There is no universal answer which would suit all products. Every medicine may require individual approach, but certain aspects can be applied at a higher level across various products. So let's have a look what are the requirements. The list includes various topics, and one could ask if there is a possibility for having one more systematic approach for establishing the criteria. We can say that any medicine should be designed to meet patient needs and to consistently deliver the intended product performance. During development of the quality target product profile should be established, and this should take into consideration specific needs of the pediatric population. Based on the quality target product profile, the critical product quality attributes should be then identified, as well as the formulation and process parameters that may affect them. In practice, it means that aspects such as the active substance, target age groups, and condition to be treated, and formulation technology aspects should be considered when deciding on the appropriateness of the pharmaceutical design of a pediatric medicine. We can see on the slide that the list includes quite a number of different aspects that should be considered during development. But we can see as well that it's a mix of various aspects. And then in the next slide, I'm trying to systematize and to put some approach that can be applied when thinking about how to develop medicines for children. Definitely, certain characteristics need to be taken into account. 3 aspects should be considered, as mentioned already: active substance, patient and condition to be treated, and formulation technology. Available technology for a particular company, or any limitations resulting from the patient and condition and active substance properties. So these 3 high-level aspects will actually drive the formulation development and will influence the final outcome from the process. Let's focus first on the active substance. Characteristics of the active substance will influence the development. The type of the formulation, dosage form, and route of administration will depend on the properties of the active substance. Characterization of the active substance should include discussion on at least the following aspects: solubility and permeability, information about first-pass metabolism, about half-time, required dose and its criticality, physical chemical stability, and taste. Those characteristics should be clearly discussed, analyzed, and disclosed in the PIP application, as they will be one of the important factors considered during development and influencing the final outcome. Once we know the substance, we know its properties, we should analyze the patient or target age group who will be taking the product and the condition that will be treated with the medicine we want to develop. Characterization of a patient should include aspects relating to development physiology, such as metabolic capacity, barrier functions, gastrointestinal tract, ability to swallow, sensory perception, pain, taste. Those aspects cannot be neglected. It's not an exhaustive list, so probably other developmental physiology characteristics of the patient could be included, but these are main frequently seen as and considered as being important for the development. We cannot forget about the condition that we want to treat, and condition is closely related to the patient and should be included in this analysis. It's important if it's chronic or acute condition. Administration setting is also important, as different requirements are for products which will be administered in a hospital setting and completely different for home care or self-administration. We need to address specific PK and PD needs, for example, frequency of dosing, whether frequent dosing is needed or prolonged release formulation may be needed because of the environment when the patient stays. And also, site of action is really important and should be included in the detailed analysis. After characterization of the active substance and establishing the requirements for the patient and condition to be treated, we can start thinking about delivery approach. Aspects such as route of administration or delivery system, excipients, their safety and functionality, but also aspects like active substance excipients ratio, test masking ability, and especially palatability in relation to orally administered product, suitability of a device, and we are talking here both about measuring and administration devices, dosing flexibility and accuracy, site and dispersibility, ease or pain of administration. These aspects will also guide us towards the final outcome, meaning formulation that we want to develop, and they cannot be neglected in development. They should be considered. One of the points we usually see often in the PIP applications in the agency is that PIP applications are not often addressing all those aspects. This actually will result in follow-up. We will engage in dialogue with the applicant in order to ensure that those aspects were addressed or at least included in the analysis. So systematic approach is needed, and it will help assuring that formulations are suitable for children and appropriately adapted to the relevant age groups. As we can see from the slide, this is the list of the frequently seen issues arising or seen during assessment, evaluation of pediatric investigation plans. And this also flags that maybe not necessarily all three aspects are included in analysis, which is a crucial part of the development. So I would encourage everyone who is preparing pediatric investigation plans to focus on a thorough analysis and including a proper justification why particular dosage form was developed, what were the critical parameters, critical characteristics considered during development, how properties of the active substance guided development of a particular formulation and resulted in a particular dosage form to be administered via a particular route of administration. How the product that is designed, that is proposed, will be used in the particular setting by particular patients, and what are the risks associated with use of this product. Of course, various problems may be and will be encountered during development, even if it is a systematic approach, especially that some of those problems are due to the lack of knowledge on particular aspects or due to the new emerging information which is relevant to children. Let's focus on, for example, on excipients. Information on excipients, on their use in pediatric population, and precisely safety data is still fragmented. We don't know if the accumulated safety data relevant to the pediatric population is relevant to pediatric population. They, meaning excipients, may be tolerated in adults, but what about the pediatric population? Can we say that if one excipient is safe to be used in adults, the same applies to pediatric patients? I think that no one can say without any hesitation, yes. We need further evidence demonstrating this concept. Then, what about existing formulations? How are we going to deal with excipients? What are we going to do with excipients which are already in existing formulations once new emerging information indicates that actually those excipients should not be used in pediatric populations? And of course, we agree that formulations for pediatric population may need to be different. And of course, during development, efforts should be made to use a minimum number and levels of excipients. On the other hand, we need to acknowledge that we cannot prepare useful formulations without excipients. They are necessary to ensure that the product that they will be developed will be accepted by the patient and will be used as intended. Of course, not excipients are bad excipients. So we can divide excipients into group. We can characterize them by their safety considerations, and some of them can be classified as acceptable or neutral because their use is not associated with any safety issues. Some excipients will be called controversial. We know at this stage already that their use is associated with certain risks, and we should avoid using them whenever possible. However, on some occasions, we will come to a conclusion that actually it's not possible to eliminate such substance from the formulation. Current list of controversial excipients, which is based on the current knowledge or the lack of knowledge on those substances, includes in particular antioxidants, some solvents, and preservatives. I'm not going to provide the list of those substances, as everything and the situation is changing, and safety evaluation of excipients is ongoing, especially in relation to the review of a guideline on excipients So we may see soon updates on safety information on some excipients. But we know that some solvents will need to have further restrictions in their use or further considerations in relation, for example, to the duration of their use. Why we call them controversial? Because those excipients, in theory, can cause some risks when used in pediatric population, and because knowledge about safety is still very limited. The situation may change once the information about the safety of these substances is supported by further evidence coming from studies. But in some cases, actually, evaluation of the data may lead even to further restriction on their use. Another hot topic, very often discussed and still with clear gaps in knowledge, is acceptability. Successful treatment means having a product which patient will be able to take and will be taking with as designed, as intended. So when developing medicinal product, we need to ensure that the final result of development is acceptable. And acceptability can be defined as overall ability of a patient and caregiver or user to use a medicinal product as intended. Acceptability of medicine is likely to have an impact on adherence to treatment and is likely then to have impact on safety and efficacy of the product. What we know and what is certain is that acceptability should be part of the development, should be embedded in development program, and should be evaluated. Discussion is ongoing whether it should be done with target patients from the target age groups, or whether we can use also another models and extrapolate results. But for a moment, we say that it should be done preferably in clinical studies, preferably with patients from the target age groups. And of course, acceptability of a dosage form or of a formulation will be driven by the characteristics of the user, its age, ability, disease type and state, and the characteristics of the medicinal products. So there are several aspects that will influence the final outcome, and again, during acceptability testing, those aspects should be analyzed and considered. When talking about acceptability, very often we think palatability. Palatability is one of the aspects which should be analyzed as part of acceptability when we talk about oral dosage forms. And palatability can be defined as an overall appreciation of oral medicine by organoleptic properties such as vision, appearance, smell, taste, aftertaste, and mouthfeel. Palatability is determined by characteristics of components of the formulation, of the active substance, and all excipients present in the formulation. And we know that also may be relevant for other routes of administration, for example, buccal, nasal, inhalation use, when the product actually is not intended to be swallowed, but may contact the taste receptors indirectly. One aspects, one aspect that needs to be clearly stressed is that acceptability is not only palatability. Palatability is one of, but not the only element of patient acceptability of an oral medicinal product. And this is very often frequently seen mistake in pediatric investigation plans. Applicants are talking about palatability rather than discussing acceptability and general concept of the use of the product. Product may be palatable, but instructions for use may not be clear enough, or handling instructions may be so complex that the final product to be administered will be prepared in the wrong way, and this will lead to medication errors, under or overdosing. So, all these aspects should be considered, not only taste of the formulation. Of course, this is another area where still we don't know many aspects, and we don't know how to analyze them. One of those aspects is methodology. How to analyze, how to confirm that a particular product is acceptable and palatable. So for the time being, we can say that those questions are awaiting answers. We need to analyze and we need to define whether studies with children are better when in comparison with studies with trained adult panels, whether we prefer studies in patients or in healthy volunteers, and design of studies, number of subjects involved, questionnaires to patients and caregivers, the use of hedonic scales. All these issues still are awaiting answers. And taking this opportunity, I would like to invite all those who are developing products to engage in dialogue with us regulators, as we cannot impose any requirements without knowing if the concept we are proposing will work in practice or not. So current approach would be that age-appropriate and depending on the age of the patients to be treated, methodology should be involved, and this should involve patients or patient and caregivers. We know that several methods have been described in the literature. However, knowledge is still fragmented, and internationally harmonized method has not been yet developed. So we believe that for a moment it's not appropriate to impose any method for palatability or acceptability testing at this stage. And the same would apply to the acceptance criteria. Regulators cannot provide clear guidance on acceptability testing. So the choice of the method and acceptance criteria should be proposed and justified by the applicant, but they should be clearly discussed in the PIP application. And we expect that suitability of the chosen method and the appropriateness of this method and limits proposed should be discussed and justified. And in the justification, we should always bear in mind benefit-risk considerations. And this should include risk at population level, for example, emergence of resistance in case of products containing antibiotics, or should also take account of the characteristics of the target age group, the condition relevant to the medicine, incidental and multiple use, and commodification. So several factors should be included, and this will drive the method proposed for acceptability, palatability testing. And this should be clearly explained in the pediatric investigation plan. Otherwise, the rationale, the basis for choosing a particular method and particular limits will not be clear and understood for the experts reviewing application. So it needs to be acknowledged that there are still many gaps in the knowledge, and we still are awaiting answers to many questions. And I'm aware that this presentation is probably not solving all issues, is not going to provide answers to all these questions. on the contrary, is raising some aspects which information is still missing and we need to discuss further. But as a general advice to the applicants, what we can say, start dialogue with regulators in early phase of development. And it's not expected that PIP will contain all details and the final formulation and the dosage form. However, it should contain a concise and logical development plan. It should be clear why particular dosage form, why particular formulation is being developed, what was the rationale. Having general statements saying that this particular form is developed because it was mentioned in a particular guideline on or reflection paper may not be sufficient, as we know that harmonized, unified approach may not always be applicable to all cases. The best way of approaching development, pediatric development, is to apply principles of the guideline ICHQ8 on quality development. To identify target product profile and establish this taking into consideration specific needs of the pediatric population. Once the quality target product profile is identified, we will be able to comment on critical attributes of the product and then link them with the formulation and the process parameters that may affect them. And finally, link them with the patient who will be using the product. So this will actually ensure successful development. Strategy followed during development should be discussed and justified in the PIP. As I mentioned before, referring to guidelines or reflection papers without further discussion may not be sufficient. PIP should be prepared for a particular substance, particular product to be used in the treatment of a particular disease in particular age group or age groups of pediatric patients. And harmonized approach saying for patients below 2 years of age, we cannot propose particular dosage forms may not always be applicable. So this approach will also stimulate further development in the area and will lead to further improvements in the area of pediatric medicines. Another thing that should be kept in mind when discussing PIP applications is that quality should always be discussed in relation to safety and efficacy. For example, excipients. And quality cannot be considered as a standalone piece of the dossier. Quality will always influence the outcome. So when designing particular dosage form, when designing particular formulation, safety of the active substance, safety of the excipients proposed, but also route of administration and other aspects linked to pure pharmaceutical development should be considered, thinking about potential impact on safety and efficacy and setting when the product will be used. We need to think about patients who will be using the product and design medicines so they can take it. And we cannot disregard characteristics of the condition to be treated, and this will also influence development. One cannot develop tablets for unconscious patients because those patients won't be able to take those tablets. So from the very beginning, approach will not be appropriate. So it also confirms that these characteristics are important in the development. Way forward, we need to be very honest. We need to say that there is lack of knowledge, and this needs to be recognized, specified, and we need to do our best to fill in the gap. More research is needed, and this is also a plea for a dialogue. It's a dialogue between industry, academia, and regulators. Many answers can be found only through a research, but then those answers need to be put in a form of guidelines, reflection papers, and this is job for regulators. And only by sharing experience and opinions and harmonized and commonly acceptable approaches, then we can establish what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So discussion must continue. When developing products, we need to find a balance between strong and relaxed position on formulation issues. And we need to balance between the need to have high quality appropriate pharmaceutical formulations for sensitive population with special needs. We need to apply precautionary principle because of the special population that will be treated with our medicines. We cannot disregard benefit risks arguments in the discussion, and we need to be consistent, meaning any derogation, any exceptions should be clearly justified and should be clearly explained. In this presentation, I also included link and references to useful documents which I encourage you to consult during development. Reflection paper on formulation of choice for pediatric population and guideline on pharmaceutical development of medicines for pediatric use create a basis, a starting point in learning on how to develop medicines for children. Those documents can be supplemented by additional guidelines, for example, on investigation on medicinal products in term and preterm neonates, where there's also part of the guideline dedicated to quality aspects, but also other guidelines, for example, on excipients in the dossier, ICHQ8, not for guidance on pharmaceutical development, excipients in the label and package leaflet should be consulted during development. As mentioned before, the guideline on excipients is currently under revision and should result in more information. Revision should lead to obtaining more information on safety aspects related to pediatric population. We cannot disregard food legislation, opinions, scientific opinions of European Food and Safety Agency, but also scientific opinions of committees of the agency, for example, CHMP, as those opinions can also create a good basis for discussion about safety, mainly excipients. One aspect which I would like to stress is that guidelines are not legally binding. Their purpose is to set up principles and general requirements that should be followed. But what is important during development and what should be kept in mind is the spirit of the guideline. And of course, derogations can be acceptable if adequately justified. And very often we see in applications that applicants are coming with a new proposal saying guideline proposes certain approaches. However, in our opinion, our approach may be even better. This is the justification, this is the rationale why we believe products should be developed in that way rather than the way suggested by the guideline. And on many occasions, such approaches are accepted because being engaged in a discussion, providing arguments for development proves that it is a conscious development, and a company, when developing product, thought about patients, about technology to be used, and about active substance which is present in their product. I hope that with this presentation I managed to clarify at least some aspects of pediatric development. Quality of PIP is an important and vast topic, and not aspects could be discussed in depth. So I consider this as a starting point in the discussion, and I'm happy to continue this discussion now during the session where I would try to answer your questions, but also after the presentation we can engage in dialogue, and any suggestions and information would be really appreciated. Any information and advice that could lead to further improvement of the quality information, quality approaches in development of medicinal products for pediatrics will be considered and reflected in future documents which will be published on the agency website. Now, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking to questions. Thank you very much.
Piotr, thank you very much for that really informative talk. You've given lots of good general advice, and pointed us towards a number of documents that can supplement that advice. And I'm also really grateful to you for opening up a dialogue, not just in relation to this webinar presentation, but in general as a dialogue between yourself as a regulator, academics, the industry, and practitioners. And we'll talk again in just a minute about the mechanism for doing that. I must say that the take-home messages for me from your presentation were, first of all, to discuss and justify within the PIP, and secondly, that benefit and risk are both important considerations when we're talking about formulation. What may be acceptable for an over-the-counter type remedy may be quite different when we're talking about something in dealing with a life-threatening illness, perhaps. So I think the only question or the only response at the moment for you, Piotr, is in terms of your advice, is there any one thing that you would advise participants to do if they're responsible for completing the quality section of a PIP, or any one thing that is almost always overlooked that they ought to be thinking about?
Thank you, Tony, for this question. If I was to summarize my presentation and give advice in a single slide, I would probably direct our participants to the triangle, because this is what usually is missing in pediatric investigation plans. The rationale, the justification, why particular dosage form is being developed. These three aspects, active substance, patient and condition, and formulation technology, very often is not discussed in applications, and this makes the decision process very difficult to understand why particular dosage form is developed, why not other forms, why other forms were not considered. Maybe there is a valid point for not considering them in development, but this information usually is not disclosed in the application. And having, as I mentioned, having concise but systematic approach in development, justifying decisions made, will make our development evaluation, easier, and also will prove that this is really targeted development. We need to be assured that applicant knows the active substance, knows the patient and condition that will be treated, and then links those two aspects with the formulation which is being developed. So for me, the essence would be this slide, the triangle, three aspects that is a must to be discussed in the application.